First topic I want to kind of jump into today is race, right? And its creation. And I was doing a little research, and I was seeing that in Spain in the 1400s, there was kind of a creation of laws, the first documented laws where race was being basically catalyzed and used to segregate people. And Sandra did also some research on that. A lot of the laws originally were formulated to focus on people of Jewish faith and race. I was reading that they were basically setting up these laws to where they could break into these people's homes whenever they wanted and just take all of their shit, basically. And we kind of see that it was used for not the best purposes, obviously. But I want to kind of open a discussion about that now.
Well, I can give you a little background as to the article that you had sent. So there was a gentleman by the name of Jeffrey Gorski who wrote this great article that Anthony sent called "How Racism Was First Officially Codified in the 15th Century in Spain." So what we're looking at is a community that had a pretty diverse, at the time Spain was fairly diverse. You had a really large Jewish community, had a really large Arab community known as the Moors. Mm-hmm. There was what was called Christian negrophobic racism. Now, these are Jeffrey's words, not mine. I do want to be very specific. I want to cite each author and their work. They are the experts in this. So there was a gentleman, an archdeacon by the name of Fernan Martinez, who is known as the prime motivator for violence towards Jews specifically. So at the time, a third to half of the Spanish Jews, the largest community in Europe at the time, were converted to Christianity. It was a mass conversion. It was done in a way that basically created animosity between old Christians versus new Christians. And so a lot of the laws were in place where you had to prove with 4 generations, you had to prove I am 4th generation or more new Christian in order to have something as simple as being able to have land, hold public and private office. So there was resistance. There was certainly resistance towards this. And we can talk about a gentleman by the name of Loyola. So give me just one moment here.
Which set of colleges here in the United States named after him?
So his name was Ignacio de Loyola, which is the founder of Jesuit, which is order of priests. Mm-hmm. But at the time, what was happening in Spain is they set aside something called sentencia estatuto, which barred converts, or again, the new Christians from, again, holding those public offices and private offices, receiving land. They had to prove how many generations they were. It was known as the first example in history of legalized racism. Now that's from Leon Poliakov, which is an anti-Semitism expert. So the restrictions, and discrimination were based on racial rather than religious definition of Judaism. So it banned them completely, even from marrying in certain areas. It exiled them. Even in universities, they were barred from them. And by the early 16th century, cathedrals, they began to just bar them from church offices. So that's where we have this kind of battle between Loyola versus Juan Martinez. And I may be mispronouncing, I apologize, but Silicio. Silicio was the big proponent for what's called limpieza. Limpieza is a Spanish word for cleaning. So cleaning the race, getting rid of anything that wasn't Spaniard, Castilian. And of course, his opponent, Loyola. It unfortunately ended up trickling the idea of cleansing the race. If you've ever heard of the 1-drop rule, that ended up in the Americas. If you have one,
you're right. Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah, though, what was it? 1/8 rule.
16.
I was
1/8. Yeah, 1/8. 18th.
16.
1/16. That's right. It was 1/16 rule.
So so basically, what ends up happening in kind of a nutshell. Again, I'm no expert on this one, but just from the general research that I've done and that I've had in my past studies, it does end up trickling through the Americas, and now we have classifications of race. We have what's known, words I'm sure you've heard like mulatto, words like mestizo, that now are classifying basically people who are half white with something else. And I have here that this is a historian called Alden Bond notes that because the Latin American model of life, we had that as a lifetime, the inheritable servitude was apparent to everyone. So the Spanish and the Portuguese colonists held 250,000 Black slaves by 1617. So Virginians had no need to invent a new status of race. We had already invented that for them.
Copy paste, right?
Basically a kind of a copy and paste. Now you can easily point the finger at Spain and say this is your problem, but I kind of doing a little more research, I find this really great article called "Did Race and Racism Exist in the Middle Ages?" And now we're looking at a situation where we have medieval England as the first racial state in the history of the West, and I have here, and again, I want to be able to cite this correctly.
I'm going to put this below too when I post this.
Oh, thank you.
Those articles, yeah. So I'm
Perfect.
gonna have those all for anybody that's watching to read those and research further.
Please. So this is Geraldine Heng, who basically had said that the church and state laws produce surveillance, tagging, herding, incarceration, legal murder, expulsion. There was even a popular story of Jews killing Christian boys evolved over the centuries, showing how changes in popular culture helped create the emerging communal identity.
There was a narrative created, by the way, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, but these are her words at showing how changes in popular culture helped create the emerging communal identity of England. So basically, it's seeing the ascension of what is a superiority according to them.
Right, but it's also creating a narrative based in fear, right?
Oh, absolutely. This isn't based in any fact. This is just This is just a means of controlling a narrative, of maintaining a certain position, and unfortunately having a scapegoat. It was all fear. But that's essentially a little bit of the research that I had done.
Oh, and the tax revolt in Toledo. Did you want to speak on that a little bit?
Absolutely, sure. Yeah. We can absolutely speak about that. So going back to Spain, we can certainly talk about how it actually started in a political way. So there was a gentleman by the name of Álvaro de Luna, which was a favorite of the king at the time, who demanded a loan of about 1 million maravedis, and the townspeople in Toledo originally resisted. So now we have an official by the name of Pedro Sarmiento, who joined the rebellion as a means of getting rid of Luna. But really it was a way of targeting those new converts, those Jewish people who were forced to convert. So again, all political, but in order to justify what you had explained of basically the looting of their home, they had to claim that they were secretly still practicing Judaism, and that in some way or another they were scheming against the Catholic Church.
Right.
So that created that animosity.
It was just another excuse just to basically legally do whatever they want.
Essentially, yes. Essentially, yes.
Yeah. So I want to kind of talk about the parallels from then into now, and kind of open that discussion to you all. What parallels do you see from early America to now with, a lot of those, again, race rules and laws created in Europe?
Lots of justifications. Forget where I heard it, but like historically, people would try to paint a group or a segment of people as, some sort of inhuman, like they're rapists and murderers, just classify them as animals as justification for treating them a certain way on a broader scope, if that makes sense. And you start to see it like it's all over my Facebook feed with the Black Lives Matter. You always get the All Lives Matter people. That's a given. But then you also always get the people that are like, well, if Black Lives Matter, how come no one's doing anything about Black on Black violence? And that's just a justification.
That's something I want to get to a little bit later.
Yeah. And that's simply a justification. You're like, okay, your people are acting like animals, and so the cops are treating them like animals. But there's more to it than that. Like, it's common sense that there are organizations that are working within these cities, in these communities, that are trying to do things that curb, inner city violence. Like I
Hmm.
was personally a part of Good City Mentors, which goes into schools with troubled kids. Like they put them into these schools when they are kicked out or suspended or expelled from another school. They put them into these schools, and then this program with these mentors comes in, and we actually mentor these children and help them to turn their lives around before they get in real trouble.
Mm.
And though that's not directly affiliated with like Black Lives Matter or any of these other um, organizations, that is effective work that's going on inside of the community that doesn't get any play.
It needs to get more play.
It needs to get more play. And there are mentorship organizations everywhere, but they're all smaller groups doing their own thing within the community. So in the larger conversation, it just really doesn't get brought up. And if it's not on the world stage, people are going to keep using this excuse as if to say that nothing is going on in these communities that's trying to help these kids. It's trying to stop the violence.
Mm.
And it's just infuriating because they keep using it as a justification, and it's not a real justification because they don't do their research. They're just parroting whatever other people say.
Exactly. And we see that more and more often, right? We don't see people with actual thought, right? Where they've done the research, where they've done the reading, where they've really gone out of their way. I mean, we see that in our leadership as well, where it's just watch.
Yep.
And again, it shows how susceptible we are to media. It shows how easily we're formed into whatever model the people that are in charge of those conglomerates, want you to think. So again, getting back to the United Corporations of America.
Okay.
That's accurate.
I think when we're talking about race and about the creation of race and the codifying of different types of people, we have to go all the way back and think about, evolved human psychology. Human beings are naturally xenophobic. We fear the other, the outside group, because, they could be trying to take what we have, right? So that really worked really well for us 100,000 years ago when we were still, derping about on the grasslands, right?
Right. Nomads.
You didn't know when you were going to see your next meal. You didn't know, if a group that you came across was going to try to, harm you or your children. So, that kind of mindset worked back then, and it was important. But in today's world, it's no longer valid.
Right.
We've moved beyond those concerns. But I think it's interesting that you can see we talked about last week. We talked about race as being a social construct, and it 100% has no biological relevance.
And that's why I wanted to go back to the history of it, of when it was created and why it was created.
Right. So it has no biological correlate, but I think that if you look at it in terms of economics, you can kind of see how, in Spain in the 15th century, the Catholic Church was, the thing. It's the big dog in the yard, and they had to do something. With having that power, you have to always kind of be. Once you have that kind of power, you're kind of paranoid, maybe, of how you're going to keep that power and how you can make sure that no one else has any access to it, and maybe even how you can even gain even more power.
Right.
Because you have to think the church at that time was huge, and it had huge influence all throughout the world. At least what we traditionally call the Western world. The
Levantine.
It made, looking back at our xenophobic brains, our smaller 100,000-year-old brains, right? We could see how they would be like, well, we need to make some distinctions so that, those people that are a little bit different from us, that do things, they pray to the same God, but it's different. So they're different. So they could probably be bad. they could be a risk. So we can't risk like them intermingling with us and possibly getting some of this power to take away. We have to protect our interests here. We have to protect our grains, you know, our whatever, our meat, our kill, whatever. And I think that if you move forward into America, it's the same way. It's always been, at the end of the day, I think it's always been an economic concern, you know, that because we talked about this last week. After the Civil War, the populists were trying to unite poor whites and black people, recently freed slaves, to kind of topple over what was becoming just a gigantic, like bloated, what is now something that's too big to fail and too big. It's so large, the establishment that, you know, of powerful people that have a lot of concentrated wealth. Populists were trying to, you know, bring together poor whites and recently freed slaves and saying, look, you know, if we all work together, we can have this, we can topple this thing, we can make this not a thing anymore. You know, There's enough for everybody to have all that they need, but we have to topple down this thing first. And they couldn't do that. So that's when you saw a lot of concentrated effort to, you know, obviously, you know, enslaving people is one thing, and that goes back to even further. But it's always been, I think, at its core, this power struggle where there's, you know, a group that has a lot to lose, and they have to figure out, how can we divide people? How can we get people to not think that they're the same as each other? And the easiest way to do it is by, well, I mean, that person looks different from you, so they are different, and they're bad because of it. And so, you know, you need to not necessarily don't mix with those people. You know, you don't want to have children with them. You don't want to be friends with them even, you know, because they're evil people, right? I mean, that's where I see it coming from. I see it as like
protecting interest.
Yeah, no, I mean, I see it. Yeah, I see it as like an interest in like something that, you know, this group of people has something to lose. So how do they not lose it? They go off and, you know, codify people and try to make people into different groups and then pit them against each other.
Yeah. But this is an open forum. But
I'm not sure how deep you really want to go on this, especially on the religious part, because, you know, I'll crush that. But
look, this is to crush dreams and
that's all I'm about. You know that. So.
And wake people the fuck up. No, Britt, I want you to be unfiltered, and I want you to talk. No. Fuck that. I want to hear the whole shebang-a-bang. This is a genuine conversation. That's what I want this to be. I don't want people to fucking hold back. I want you to, you know, say what it is. Exactly.
All right, man.
How you feel. So please do.
I want to talk pick up on the point that Ethan was talking about, just in terms of how this small group of people from a worldwide perspective has all this power, and how they are keeping this power through the brainwashing of religion.
That's
so let's go back to
the opiate of the
Pope Pius II made an edict that you could enslave Africans if you labeled them savages. The Catholic Church, with the church in general, is the biggest problem from an economic perspective. I mean, there's a reason why that Notre Dame helmets are gold. That's a smack in the face to us as Africans. But that's another subject. When you have leaders of churches okaying the enslavement of a group of people for economic purposes, I mean, you have to start there. I mean,
that's what I'm saying.
It's so much deeper than this pussyfooting bullshit that, I mean, the church was in on it. Like, and we look at these same people as, you know, whatever you believe in. You know, I've told you before, I'm over that piece. I was raised Christian. After learning the history, how
many people went to Catholic school here?
We all did, and I'll never send my son there ever.
Went to the same school.
Exactly.
we all went to Purcell.
Right.
We all went to Purcell. Seems like, you know, us Cincinnati guys, and knowing the history of how, especially the Catholics, how they were in on this, and you look at their elaborate churches and their elaborate cathedrals and all the money they've made by milking African Americans in so many ways, starting with Constantine. So we got to study the period from 1482 to 92 before Ferdinand and Isabella gave him the keys to go on this world domination tour in Spain, right? So I know, are we still on that point about 1400 Spain?
Yeah, you know, absolutely. Yeah, we're not done.
Okay. So I'm just looking at in terms of, I mean, we even go back to one of the first slave ship was called Jesus of Lubbock, or Good Ship Jesus. Like one of the first slave ships that brought us here was named after Jesus. How deep is that psychologically?
Seriously.
Like come on, man. Like it's a historical record. You know, it was captained by Sir Francis Hawkins. He was a religious man. So these people who are supposed to be protecting us spiritually are the same ones who are economically gaining power to destroy us at the same time. It's not about none of the stuff that they say. It's like America doesn't stand for anything it says it really does. Like this is all hypocrisy.
Exactly.
The greatest. And all men created equal. Yeah, all white men were created equal. When the flag was being sewn together, we were slaves. That flag means nothing to a lot of
slave was fucking, sewn together.
You look at the Drew Brees comments, it's just a disconnect between what it means to certain factions of white America and what it means to people who were crushed by America.
Yeah.
You know, and slavery still exists. It's not something, the physical slavery might be over.
We talked about the industrial complex last week.
Oh, come on, man. And like you said, and it starts in school.
Absolutely.
I can show you how race is used to classify and categorize, especially African American kids, into special education. Like they have a problem or an issue.
Remedial classes.
Yeah, come on,
right?
Right.
And then what does that do to your psychology as a high school student? What does that do?
Crushes
you. That's what it does.
There's a study that I showed my principal one time about how there is a psychologist working with an African American girl, and she puts out all these different Barbies, right? And the girl picks up the white Barbie and says, "This is the standard of beauty." So she already feels as a black child, because living in America, that she is not subhuman, but not as equal.
Lesser
right?
than.
Her self-esteem is crushed by, like African American self-esteem is crushed by being here. My last name isn't Smith. That's my slave master's last name. We have no identity, none. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Like you,
Eric, we had a conversation about this.
Cook, you might be able to trace your history all the way back to Europe.
I can. Yeah, my
history is traced back to South Carolina.
Exactly.
My slave ancestors working in the indigo plantations.
Right.
I don't know who I am.
Jennifer, my wife.
Know who we are.
Jennifer, my wife. Yeah. She has the whole list from Mississippi of each generation before the Tisdale, right? The Tisdale plantation that her entire family, worked on.
Right.
And then the list of the family tree. I've seen it, and it's just like,
it's deep, man. It's deep.
I almost was in tears when I saw that shit. I'm like, holy fucking shit.
Right.
And it's like, it's not that long ago either.
No.
Right.
Yeah. I was thinking about that actually.
Really not that long